The world is going crazy. Let me introduce Shad White, the state auditor. Good morning, Shad. How are you, sir?
Hey, brother. How are you?
Listen to this. Alabama high school band director was shocked with a stun gun and arrested after Birmingham police said that he wouldn't tell his band to stop playing. I'm not sure if California is not having a effect on the other states. Local news outlets reported Minor high school band director, Minor, M-I-N-O-R, is the name of the high school, last week was arrested after a football game between Minor and Jackson Olin High School. He is charged with disorderly conduct, harassment, and resisting arrest. Birmingham police officer and also a spokesman for the department said the police tried to clear the stadium as Jackson Olin, after the game, they wanted to clear the stadium and asked both bands, would you please stop playing so we can clear the stadium? Police said Jackson Olin band stopped performing, but the director disregarded officers and told his students, no, you just keep playing. Police officers, accompanied by school security guards, went to arrest him for disorderly conduct. He got into a scuffle with them. Band director refused to place his hands behind his back and shoved the officer. One of the officers shocked the band director with a stun gun. Paramedics treated the band director, took him to the hospital to be checked out. From one moment, you go from a band director to a radical in the next moment.
Play to the whistle. That's what I say. Play to the whistle.
Gee, unbelievable. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I was not aware of that story, but now I feel like I've learned something already on this week.
We always give money back if somebody in this audience doesn't learn at least one thing per day. I do want to ask you this, though, and let's get this out of the way. You were on military duty, and we had some confusion here. I said, is the state auditor available? And they said, no, he was on call. So what stands with that for people who don't know?
Well, I'm in the Mississippi National Guard, so we typically serve 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. But, of course, you're always eligible to get deployed. You're always up for training, mandatory training that has to happen. So I actually got called up for a chunk of July and August, and there was potential that I may have to be gone for a little bit longer. But, it's just part of military life. This is a thing that I think the National Guard really brings of value to the state, is that you can take folks who have expertise in the civilian world and then they can contribute to the military too. So
absolutely.
Anyway, I was out a little bit in Mississippi, a little bit in other places too, for a long training exercise for a while, but thankfully back with the family and
so you're not leaving again then, as far as you know.
Who knows is what I would say. I'll tell you this: that there's literally a bag packed at the foot of my bed right now, just in case something happens. So
how many National Guardsmen do we have down on the border, or do we? As far as you know?
I don't know. That's a good question. I know some other states have sent National Guardsmen down there. I'm not sure if we have any down there. Don't know. It's a good question.
I was doing some show prep on this one and reading some of the social media, and I'm not sure it's to the point of Oprah Winfrey or Austin Kutcher or some of these people as far as a fire out there, but it seems to me that you've kicked the fire ants on social media on this gender thing and university study. What's going on there?
Well, last week we're putting the finishing touches on a study that analyzed the college majors that contribute back to Mississippi's economy, the college majors that are most likely to generate graduates who actually stay here in Mississippi and the ones who go other places. And so I threw out a snippet of our study and said, look, the truth is, the state is funding a gender studies major at a university at the exact same level that the state funds an electrical engineering major. But the electrical engineering major makes, on average, $71,000 per year if they take a job in Mississippi. And, for instance, a sociology major makes about a third of that. So maybe we should start a conversation about spending taxpayer money on the majors that actually contribute back to Mississippi's economy. And you would have thought that I had murdered a puppy in the street or something like that. I mean, there was a real outcry from a lot of people. It was really around the country. The second post I made after that has been seen over 1 million times. I'll tell you this, Paul, I'm going to have a piece in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow on it. So this has stirred a national conversation. I think the reason it has is, I'll just be blunt in saying it, I think the left views a lot of these crazy college majors as their mechanism for warping the minds of young people and indoctrinating them. And when you start talking about challenging the funding for those programs, they get really, really mad. That shows you how important this is to them.
Taking away some of their ammunition.
Yes.
Couldn't you say the same thing as far as some of the curriculum, as even in public education, as far as high school? Well, K through 12.
Sure, but here, let's be honest with K through 12. That's a time when kids are younger. They're exploring a whole bunch of different interests. So, if you want to spend taxpayer dollars on a chess club or whatever, there's no guarantee that those kids are going to be professional chess players later on, but maybe it's good for them to have that experience. Now, flash forward in somebody's life, when you're making a decision about taking on a massive amount of student debt to ideally prepare you for a job later on, you better not be messing around. Don't take classes and spend money on something that is not going to be of value to you later on. And yet that's what the taxpayers are doing every single day. We're sending money to public universities, and sometimes that money's being used on majors that really contribute back to the economy. Sometimes it's just not. Sometimes it's being used on majors who are very likely to leave the state or take a job in Mississippi where they're making almost next to nothing and can never repay their debt in the first place.
How do you answer those naysayers out there who said this is out of the purview of the state auditor's office? You consider that within the purview?
I do, because it involves the expenditure of taxpayer dollars and what is wise and what is not. I mean, since the mid-'90s, the state auditor's office has had the ability to do analyses of how we spend money and report back to the taxpayers where the money's going and whether or not that seems to be yielding any return on the investment for the taxpayers.
Have you heard from anybody at any of our universities here?
Nope. Not a single university has contacted me about that study. And I'll say this, the study hasn't actually come out yet. I started tweeting on social media last week to preview what the study was going to show, but the study comes out on Wednesday, so I haven't heard from any universities about this. What I'd call for at the end of our study is the establishment of a committee, and I'm talking economists, workforce experts, somebody from institutions of higher learning. Let's put together a committee of people who really understand our economy and really understand what we need, and let's have them sit down and look at which majors are going to contribute back and which ones are just not.
In addition to Shad's statement, it makes those gender studies majors, etc., dependent on government benefits like welfare due to such low incomes. 662.
Of course. Look at the average salaries of some of these kids graduating from some of these just ridiculous programs. I mean, they're getting classes in, the ethnography of shopping malls. I'm not making that up. That's on the website. If you go look at what these kids are learning, and then they finish, they have debt, and then they can't get a good job. So a lot of them leave. They go to a city where they think maybe I can find a job in a big company somewhere. So we're subsidizing the economies of these big out-of-state cities. And then for the ones that stay here, they can't make a good salary, so they end up dependent on government in other ways.
State Auditor Shad White. But let me get this straight now. You're not saying if they want to teach it, fine, but just don't charge the state? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I mean, think about my alma mater, the University of Mississippi. Last time I looked at their budget, they got about 15% of their budget from state appropriations. They raised plenty of money outside of just their state appropriations. I just don't know why a plumber who's paying his taxes in Mississippi needs to finance a gender studies degree. Why does he need to? I've had nobody answer that question for me. Why does it benefit that guy? So the reason we fund public education in general is because we think that investing in the training of another person is going to uplift the entire economy around the original taxpayer. It's called the neighborhood effect. But there's no neighborhood effect if you subsidize a major that creates a person who then either has to leave to go get a job or they stay here and they can't get a good paying job. Or they're so indoctrinated that they spend their time trying to ruin society. How does that benefit the plumber? How does it benefit him?
Do you see this changing as far as this mandate from generations past that you've got to go to college? If you don't go to college, you're a failure. Do you see it changing?
I think that there are a lot of people who should not go to college because they would be better off not taking on the debt and then learning a trade. But let's also be honest about something, Paul. When you're 17 years old and you've watched Mississippi State play football every Saturday and you've visited maybe a couple of times and it feels great up there, there's a resort and there's all sorts of pretty girls up there, do you think that you're going to say, well, you know what? I probably should just go straight to trade school and go ahead and learn a trade. Now, I think that might be a smart decision for a lot of people, but for a lot of folks, they want that experience of the university. So let's
especially if mom and dad can afford it.
Yeah, if mom and dad's paying, and the taxpayers are paying too. So let's make sure that we're investing our money wisely in these public universities for the kids who will go there.
How much money has the state auditor returned in tax dollars this month? We will ask the state auditor, Shad White, that and much more. Come here, Shad White. State auditor, now, tell me that you said something about gender degrees. Urban stand-up comedy is you just made that up.
I did not. I did not.
Are you serious?
You're paying that guy's salary right now. Thank you for your generosity, Paul. We appreciate it. I mean, why does this make sense? Why does it make sense for taxpayers to funnel out money to a professor like that when we could be paying a mechanical engineering professor? And let me just make this point too. For us to pay, meaning for the universities to pay the urban stand-up comedy expert professor, is very cheap for these universities. For them to pay a great computer science professor is very expensive. Yet, the state gives these universities the same amount for sociology majors who'll go learn from that first professor as we do the computer science majors who'll go to learn from the second professor. So if you're the university and you're looking at your bottom line, it is better for you to nudge these kids into these low-skill, low-value, cheapo degrees, and worse for you and your bottom line to move them toward computer science. At the very least, you're not going to encourage somebody to go into computer science. So why don't we change the business calculus? Why don't we just say as a state, look, we want our money, taxpayer money, to go to high-value degrees that give back to the economy, that give back to folks who stay here in Mississippi as opposed to an anthropology major. And, anthropology is neat and all, but over half of those graduates leave the state of Mississippi. Over 60% of those graduates leave the state of Mississippi when they finish up, and they give back nothing in tax dollars. They give back nothing to the economy.
It's hard to argue with that because, number one, the net is what's considered before anything else. As far as generationally, that does not bode as well.
No.
As far as people leaving the state or those able to find jobs here who want to stay in here. But urban stand-up comedy, I thought you just made that up.
I did not. If I told you some of the stuff that you can find in these courses, I mean, honestly,
you need to give us a list of that.
There are some courses that are required for some of these degrees that I would be embarrassed to even describe on the air. I mean, I thought about bringing a list this morning, and then I thought, you know what, like it's embarrassing to even describe some of these things. But go do your research yourself and go look at these and then ask yourself, am I willing to use my tax dollars to pay for this right here? And look, let's make this other point too. Another group of victims in all this are these kids who get nudged into these degrees and they take on a massive amount of student debt, and then they can't repay it at the end of the day. The amount of student debt in the United States has doubled in the last 20 years, and I have to believe that goes hand in hand with the fact that we have these degrees that are super cheap for the universities and also are basically nothing more than indoctrination factories for the students. That's the problem.
Is this indigenous across the landscape as far as other universities, other places?
100% it is. I mean, this is going on everywhere.
It's not unusual for Mississippi.
No.
Elsewhere.
This is happening elsewhere. It's happening at a ton of public universities.
Is that a legislative mandate, or what do we do to correct that?
Well, let's look at what's going on in West Virginia right now. I don't know if you've seen these headlines, but West Virginia University is in the middle of a basically financial collapse right now. They don't have enough money to operate their school day to day. And so what they're having to do, really at the last minute, just to keep the lights on, what they're having to do is randomly scrap programs, think really hard about what's adding value, what's not, and very quickly close out some of the majors and some of the programs that they have. So there are two ways to do this. One, you can wait till the universities hit a crisis point, and you can then slash a bunch of programs quickly, or you can start thinking on the front end and say, all right, let's really sit down. Let's get a group of experts in the room. Let's figure out which majors are really contributing back to Mississippi's economy, and then let's start our public dollars through statutory changes, through legislation. Let's get our public dollars going to majors that actually contribute back to Mississippi's economy. Those are the two options you have, I think.
But you threw out a figure earlier, and I wonder what is the state's importance in this whole thing when you said of the money it takes to operate a university. Let's take Ole Miss. Only 15% of their funding comes from the state. The rest that's it.
That's right. So the vast majority of a lot of these universities,
because a lot of people think that we're spending, with 50-60% of their operating funds are from tax dollars.
It depends on the university, right? So it depends on how good you are at raising private dollars, depends on how good you are at attracting students. So the bulk of the funding for universities comes from student fees and tuition, and then you get private dollars, you get grants from the federal or state government, and then you get state appropriations on top of it. So Ole Miss is at one end of the extreme end of the spectrum by getting just 15% of their budget or so, somewhere in there from the taxpayers. But other universities are much more. Still, the bottom line is whether it's 15 cents on every dollar or we're paying for all of your budget, why aren't we asking hard questions about where these taxpayer dollars are going?
How much money did the state recoup from tax dollars last month? I think you put the figure at what?
Oh, last month was $144,000. But I'll say this too: I can't quite announce it right now, but we got a multi-million-dollar recovery just in the last few days, and we'll be talking about that soon. But I'm very proud of the team at the auditor's office because that's one of the largest single recoveries that we've had in my time as state auditor. We had a $55 million recovery from a pharmacy benefit manager, which was actually the largest civil recovery in the history of the state auditor's office. But had another good couple of weeks here these past 2 weeks.
Let me go back to education because this one generationally, I think it's damaging to our schools. Former school superintendent Bill Brand pleaded guilty. He was indicted and arrested in August last month. This 2021 for false representation to defraud the government, falsified student attendance records. We were doing that story on the air for October and November of 2020.
Yep. Yeah, so what we've seen, unfortunately, around the state in a bunch of different contexts is the numbers that are coming out of our K-12 public school system are sometimes not quite right. So you may have seen Jackson Public Schools had to fire a number of people because they found out that there was some fraudulent entries on student test scores. And so what we found in this Brand case that you're talking about is a superintendent who unfortunately falsified the student attendance records for the school district. And of course, when you boost your student attendance numbers, that means the state sends your school district more money. So look, it's just very important that we get these numbers right, that the numbers are not falsified, because taxpayer dollars are flowing based on what those numbers are. And taxpayers have got to have trust that the K-12 system is telling the truth, that the test scores are right, that the students' tails are actually in the seat when we say they're in the seat.
I did see a headline somewhere that said the good news we had with some of the rising grades and everything else, and the good news on Mississippi. This doesn't tank that.
Correct.
Because it's an isolated case. Do you feel like it is an isolated case?
Well, it's two different tests. That's one thing to point out is that the fraudulent test scores that were being discovered at some of these school districts were on state testing. And the scores that everyone points to when they say Mississippi's a new miracle, those are national tests. So it's two different tests. And the national tests have a lot more safeguards around them. So the national testing company will send people down to administer those tests. So, yeah, I do think that this doesn't affect the Mississippi miracle and the fact that our fourth graders are now reading at a much higher level.
I think you and I had talked in an earlier visit with all of this money coming in from the pandemic and everything else that there are going to be a lot of people who are misusing this. And the unemployment compensation was one of the areas there that you tackled.
It was wild. I mean, we uncovered over $500 million of unemployment payments during COVID that went to people who were not unemployed, were not eligible, should not have gotten it. I mean, these are payments going to folks who don't live in Mississippi, payments going to folks who are in prison in Mississippi. These are payments going to folks who should not be getting them. And I'll say this again, It was the pandemic. A lot of money was flowing very, very quickly. This was not unique to Mississippi. California estimates that they lost $11 billion in unemployment compensation fraud. So we're talking about a lot of money. That's 2 times the size of the state budget, or a little less than two times the size of the state budget here. So look, we're talking about a lot of money that flowed very, very quickly. And there are going to be problems when you see that. And the point for us in talking about all these different fraudulent mechanisms of misspending is hopefully this doesn't happen in the future. Hopefully in the future when there's some downturn or something and a lot of people are unemployed, we don't make the same mistakes we made a couple of years ago.
Final segment coming up next with State Auditor Shad. It's hard to try to keep tabs on all of it. This is one quick soundbite, but this gives you an idea, and I think you'll appreciate this.
Leaders are expressing shock after an NBC5 Investigates report we aired yesterday. We are waiting for records that show where the millions being spent on migrants is going.
Some records we did receive show employees working at migrant shelters have made more than $135 an hour.
Imagine making almost $200 an hour. These invoices show it has happened at the privately run shelters housing migrants. These invoices obtained by NBC5 Investigates show employees of a private company, Favorite Staffing, which run the city's migrant shelters, have made at least $135 an hour, in some cases more. In one invoice, a facility manager made $14,000 in a week in December. Another invoice shows a nurse earned more than $20,000 in 1 week.
It gives you an idea of what's going on with all this money coming in.
I'm in the wrong line of work. That's what I'm realizing. I got diapers to buy at home. I may need to take on a second job.
$237,000 to get the kid to 18 years old. So
I think I spent that in baby formula last month. I'm pretty sure.
You did mention this and kind of hinted that a large dollar award's coming in. You can't announce it yet, but that'll be coming in. What else is going on?
We're going to announce another arrest tomorrow, and then on Wednesday we'll have this college studies report. And let me just say something too. One of the big pushbacks that I got from saying that we should be focusing our taxpayer dollars on economic impact. Mm-hmm. Some people say, "Well, you're going to shut down all of the creative majors." And that's just not right. Again, these universities have private dollars and student fees that they can use to fund creative majors. But if you're a young person out there listening to this, look. You may love German literature. That's great. You don't necessarily have to major in German literature. In fact, you could read German literature on your own time. You could major in math and take a few classes in German literature. The problem if you major in German literature is that there are just not going to be that many jobs for you here in the state of Mississippi. And I know it's hard to tell a young person that, well, that's my passion, German literature. But you got to realize that there are a lot of people who pursued their passion and made a living at it and didn't major in that thing. William Faulkner did not have a degree in English, and yet he wrote masterworks. Jimmy Buffett didn't have a degree in music, but he's a great musician. Marshall Ramsey's a great cartoonist, and he didn't have a degree in cartooning or in art. These are folks who have made a living pursuing their passion. You don't have to major in that thing. You could go get a slightly more practical skill and then pursue your passion in your own time, and a lot of times that works out a little bit better.
But in this particular case, German literature, I think you probably would be better off taking the urban comedy stand-up.
That's right. Well,
as far as the prospects of making money from it.
If we get a Volkswagen plant, then maybe your German literature degree will come in handy. But the urban stand-up comedy, the work is thin. The work is thin in the state of Mississippi right now.
Anything else you're working on? You said an arrest is going to be announced tomorrow.
Yep. So we'll have another one of those. I mean, it's a very busy time in the state auditor's office, and then we're also gearing up, preparing a small legislative agenda for the legislature. One of those pieces of proposed legislation, again, will be a study committee on this college major analysis that we did. The state of Texas did this 2 years ago. They created a study committee through legislation. They studied how they were spending money at their community colleges specifically. And then 1 year later, they changed the way they fund their community colleges to get dollars, get taxpayer money flowing to majors that matter. Texas, North Dakota, Iowa, Colorado, these states are changing the way they fund colleges. They're going to be laughing at us as we continue to pour taxpayer money into the salaries of professors whose expertise is in urban stand-up comedy as they prepare their workforce to actually do meaningful jobs.
Were you a little taken aback by the pushback on this?
No, to be honest, I mean, I've probably spent too much of my life in the university setting. I mean, I sadly have degrees from Ole Miss, the University of Oxford, and Harvard. I've been around a lot of these university types.
Yeah.
They are very protective of their kingdom. And when you start challenging the status quo, when you start asking tough questions, they don't like it. And particularly the folks who are in these majors and programs that are using those majors and programs to push their ideology,
Yeah.
they really, really don't like it. So I frankly was not surprised.
I don't think that's any different than K through 12. As far as when you start pushing back and when you want to make some changes, i.e. school choice, you're going to get pushback from the mayor's office, where the schools are a big employment tool, all the way back from all the politicians to the school administration and everybody else. So they are a force to be reckoned with, and they don't like change.
No. You know, one of my first big studies was on waste in the K-12 education system, administrative costs going way up, and all these advocates came out and said I was attacking public schools. I'm a graduate of public schools. My mom was a 35-year public school teacher. We've got to have real conversations about the problems in our state if we're going to get serious about solving them.
State Auditor Shad White, thanks for coming in, sir. I appreciate
Thanks,
it very,
man.
very much.
Good to hear from you.
Good way to start off.